Welcome to the Locker Room podcast from DSS Coaching. I'm your host, Ciaran Deely, and I've got Ross Bennett here, Head of Integrated Performance at Queen's Park Rangers Football Club. I'll move on to chatting to Ross in a second, but today we are looking at talent identification in the youth development phase, the YDP. So, in other words, usually around 11-year-olds up to 16, 17-year-old footballers. Of course, is applied to the Gaelic Games world as well. And what we're going to look into is what really goes into identifying and developing young players within academy environments. And of course, as I mentioned, that can be in terms of Gaelic football, hurling, and professional football world as well. Okay, so between us, we're going to discuss the recruitment and trial processes, assessing players using the FA's four corner model, growth and maturation and biases, differences between boys and girls academies, and also then finally what successful players tend to look at over time. Ross, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Kiz. Good to be back on chatting. Nice.
Exactly. Okay, section one we're going to have a look at then is recruitment trials and academy pathways, and just a simple kind of processes topic really of what do the recruitment and trial processes look like within academy football and where are players mainly identified from now.
Yeah, Kia, I think we'll talk about a few differences that me and you've experienced recently around the girls and the boys pathway. But from a boys academy perspective, like we also have a foundation phase that filter age groups up as well. So 9s, 10s, 11s, and the process is pretty similar. But we have recruitment team and scouting teams around the local areas, stretching out as far as they geographically can do. There is a limit on being able to recruit anyone that's more than an hour away, which is very subjective due to traffic around London. But yeah, essentially we can't go and nab somebody down on the south coast and bring them in until it gets to PDP age, where the rules change. But essentially, we've got a group of scouts who are led by head of recruitment in the full-time role. He'll have his part-time scouts and most of them volunteers, to be honest, only working on commission if players get successful contracts throughout the pyramid. They'll bring players in. There's two ways that it happens. We've got a development centre where players can train up until under 14s, where they're like a holding, we call it like a holding pen, but something that's slightly to the side of the academy process where they have like QPR coaches and people training them for a 6-week period. And then that gives the people a little bit more time to assess whether they think it's worth them trialing for the academy. So that's one route. Or if somebody thinks somebody's really good and they've seen them at maybe at a non-league level, Sunday league level, or a player that's come out of the academy system that we was aware of has been released, they'll come straight into the academy program for a trial. And the trial now, it used to be that they was always in for a minimum 6 weeks. The volume of players we're getting in now, we have reduced that to 2 weeks. So 2 weeks is the minimum amount of time that they can come in. And then you assess them on their position, how competent they are across the four corners, which we'll talk about later. And the decisions made throughout that process, whether they actually sign for that age group on the contract or unfortunately get told that, yeah, it's a no.
Is there a little feedback session or review then? I know like the 2 weeks is the minimum amount, and can it stretch still until like a 6-week period or
Yeah,
longer?
I think that the reason why it would be 2 weeks is if somebody's like way off the level, so like you just know instantly that they wouldn't be a good fit and it's not right for them, or if you're not sure, if
Yeah.
you're not sure you'd extend it, or if somebody thinks this player is definitely worth signing, we need to sign him straight away. So two
Mhm.
weeks is a minimum. It can stretch to 6 weeks. If it does go to 6 weeks, there's like informal reviews every 2 weeks, like a little bit of feedback. This is what we think you're doing well. This is what you can improve on. And obviously, at the end, when you sign or don't sign, there'll be a formal sit down with parents and like, this is what we've seen during this trial period. Welcome any feedback from you. How was your experience? That's really important as well. Yeah, and then they kind of wrap up a bit of a formalized approach.
Yeah, that's interesting with the minimum amount of 2 weeks because like we've obviously seen hundreds or maybe even thousands at this stage of players coming in through the door, and it's so obvious after one session that they're just not up to required level at this moment, and
Yeah.
there's not much point in keeping them on. You're probably wasting your club's time, but also the player themselves, because they'd be better off going to a different club, maybe at a different level or back to grassroots and enjoy their journey a lot more.
Yeah, and in a different regime, when I was coaching with the 15, 16s, we had to so they had to be in for 6 weeks. You had to play them for a minimum of 50% of all those game minutes. That was like the internal club rules. Now, if they are way off it, there's two things: the kid suffers because the sick kid feels and confidence goes because they're just not the level, but also the other players around them start to lose kind of trust in that process, and they get affected in terms of the quality of games and stuff like that. So yeah, now you don't have to play them at all. So if they're in a 2 week period, if you think they're way off it, you don't have to play them. But every club will have the different process and policies.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. What are some of the biggest differences then between boys and girls academy pathways? And I know you're not currently directly involved in the girls academy, but you are involved with the women's setup as well. And of course, I'm working with on the girls side as well. But just particularly around recruitment, retention, progression opportunities, and I guess the overall player experience in some ways.
Yeah, obviously I get filled in with you, so I'm fairly well versed from a coaching perspective what it's like from the girls' academy from your perspective. But I think there's some big differences. Like the boys' academy, obviously it comes under the governance of EPPP. There's certain requirements that have to be in place for the boys' academy. So we have to have a full-time head of recruitment. We have to then have two paid part-time recruitment staff that oversee different aspects and different phases. And then I would say the breadth of scouts, that support that process is going to be more. So the catchment area and the net is probably wider from a boys' perspective. So you'd like to think there's less talent that goes unnoticed. In terms of when players get brought in and whether they get signed or not signed, I guess the main difference is they get put onto a contract. So they go onto a period, normally a 2 year period, depending on what age group you signed at, that you renew every 2 years. And that then means the club hold rights to some compensation if another club comes in and wants to take that player. Whereas when speaking to you, I know that doesn't happen in the girls' pathway, which is probably similar to the Gaelic scene.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a real eye opener whereby we've got to the end of the season and we're looking for new players potentially or some new players, and it's basically an open trial night. It's advertised around LinkedIn and on the website and put out on social media and everything, and whereby literally anybody can sign up for a trial. I know that's not going to be always the case with the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham, but anybody can apply. Like we had, over 100 applicants for one age group, with a small number of positions available. So we had to sift through all that information and really try and cherry pick who we wanted to come along to the trial. And then it brought me back to the olden days of a player myself, whereby as a kid you go along for trials for your county team. So it's essentially like that, where we've a warm up, we've a passing pattern practice, and then into an 11v11 game on two different nights. And as coaches, then you're just trying to assess players, offer them like a contract, even though it's not a binding contract, of course, a registration sheet, I guess. And of course, there are lots of players who are going and trialing with lots of different clubs. And then if they're a very good player and they're offered a higher up academy or club, of course, they're going to probably sign for them. But like, there's no the likes of Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, anybody can come along and like take one of your players and there's no compensation or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it is a different set of circumstances. But I mean, it's very open to anybody to apply, play well, and then sign on with a club. But people can go up the ladder without any kind of compensation. Which is tricky for some of the smaller clubs, obviously, because you can spend all your time developing young girls, players, and you receive no compensation for it. So there's a lot of work kind of gone a little bit unnoticed at times.
Yeah, sure. I think just to add on to that, is I think the probably the process of players coming into the building is probably a little bit more thorough on the boy side. So like
Yeah.
the little things like there needs to be at least 5 scout reports before a player can come into the building.
Mhm.
Like, and that's based on
Yeah.
game model, age, positional profile, blah blah blah. So I think like yeah, whereas I know, and the girls pathway. A lot of the time, it's who you know, and you played against someone, you thought that's quite good. Let's get them in. Let's have a look. So that's
Yeah,
just where they are at the minute.
yeah.
But I'm
I
sure.
think I think somewhere where it works better on the girls' side and very similar to how it is on the boys' side of development squads. So there is also an aligned development squad there who train every week. Again, open to anybody to come and join. But then you can pick some of the best of those kids to come and train then for a number of weeks with the squad, see how they get on. It's not any kind of official trial or something like that. But obviously, if they're doing really well, they can get signed into the squad, then the official squad, and that has happened actually a lot. So there's a kind of a pathway within a pathway or underneath the pathway,
Yeah.
and it works quite well. Okay, then kind of the most interesting things I think, or aspect I think of all of this talent ID is like assessing the players and their future potential. So how important is the FA four corner model when assessing players? So that's the technical, tactical, physical, psychological, and social.
Yeah, I think that's probably your cornerstone and basis of assessing any player. And when we talk about IDPs, the same thing transfers over as well. I would say initially, from a scout perspective, they have kind of a list of positional essentials that cover all of those things, but obviously they can only really watch what they see on the pitch in terms of what their job is. They'll then assess how competent that player is across all those four models: the social interaction on the pitch, how they organise, the psych element of different swings in the game, the physical elements in terms of, for example, if you're looking for a wide player and they're not fast, then
Mm,
that will go down as, this wide player's got to have something else really good to be a really effective winger. And then
yeah,
the tech tac stuff, there'll be a checklist for them to go through. So that gets them in the building initially. Once they're in the building, what I would say is really, really strong at the moment in the boys' academy is then each department gets to work around gathering real good info. So if they're 16 and above, they'll have GPS put on them straight away. Let's have a look at what they can output in training and games. Let's have a look at their max speed potential. Let's actually get some like proper data on it. Let's profile them in the gym. How strong are they? What's their robustness like? That can indicate how like available they're going to be, and how robust they'll be over a period of time. Also, what are some of their performance markers in certain jump testing? And we start to collate all that info. And then the coaching staff will do the same, albeit slightly subjective around the positional profile. So from a
yeah,
1 to 4 scale, how competent are they? Dual and a half, how good is their distribution into midfield? All the things that fit the game model and for that position will then be collated. And then when it comes down to meeting as an MDT, it'll be a review of the data. Is this player somebody that we feel we can invest in, improve on? Have they got asset resale value, or are they going to get into our first team at some point? That you'll then make a decision off the back of all that info. So it gets really thorough when they get into the building, and that's probably the greater resource that the boys' academy have over the women's, the girls.
yeah, yeah. Could you touch a little bit on like the physical corner just briefly? And I know like we will do a more of a deep dive another time episode on like the physical or the fitness test, the specific things that we carry out in the academy and everything like that. But like at the moment, it seems like it's kind of come from top down philosophy from the Premier League as regards the absolute importance of that physical capacity and players sometimes having like super strengths in that corner.
Yeah, I think it's no secret now that if you can't compete physically, you're probably not going to have a career in the game. Like long gone are the days where you can get over such a poor physical base just due to tech tactical understanding or other strengths. So the physical is really important when they come in the building. Obviously, the younger they are, there's a lot of things at play here. There's the maturation. There's where are they in their development journey. So when you do your profiling, and we have benchmarks that we have for every age group that we can like rate these certain physical qualities against. So we can say their power is in the top 25 percentile of our benchmarking at this certain age. But when you put maturation in the mix, the art then is this player going to be able to progress to something that's going to be effective in a certain area?
Yeah,
But what it comes back to is the position. So if you're coming in as a midfielder, um, probably a bad example because I think aerobic capacity can be trained over time. But if you come in as a midfielder and you can't really get around the pitch, and you don't feel that even just an increase in maturation, there's other physical tools that are going to support that, the likelihood is they're probably never going to get to the level where they can compete for the demands of the game. If you bring a wide player in or an attacking fullback back in and they're not quick, and you feel that even with maturation and training history, that's where you've got to kind of use your art a little bit around the experience of seeing these players, type of players come through the system, and they're not going to get to that level. It's probably not worth taking them unless they're outstanding from something,
Yeah,
from another ability. So that's where the MDT interaction comes. Um, Not to write anyone off who's under maturated and has got growth to come, but I think you get a sense for the good players that come through the system, even if they're small players at 13, 14, they've still got a physical ability to be able to dominate an opponent 1v1.
yeah,
So if
yeah,
you haven't got that ability and you can't move at all, the likelihood of you becoming like adequate in that area is probably quite slim. And we've gone through the process of when we coached together at QPR and worked together, where you would take on players who are technically really good, really proficient, but unfortunately they just never got to the ability where they can impact the game from a physical level. So
yeah,
it's a hard one, but once you get all the information in, you sit down, you review it thoroughly. All these conversations are had, and it's up to people like me then to give my final recommendation to the club to say,
yeah.
can this player physically get there, or we're not sure, or we don't think they're going to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I had a very interesting experience 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, whereby 10 days ago we participated in the Heston Cup in London with under 14 girls. There were like five English professional teams or academy teams, and then there was Helsinki from Finland, Malmo from Sweden, and then a Norwegian team. And interestingly, Chelsea actually went with quite physically developed girls, so they were quite strong and tall and everything like that, which I was a little bit surprised at. But they were beaten in the final on penalties by Helsinki after a 2-2 draw. And Helsinki were so impressive as a team. They were, and now granted, like Helsinki is a 2 million population. Helsinki, this club is probably the biggest club in all of Finland, so they might be attracting, some of the best girls there are in the country. But they were all, none of them were big, but they were so impressive athletically, like explosive, fast, good body awareness, agile, good change of direction, acceleration, deceleration, and like they were small, so it wasn't about how physically developed they were. It was more about like their physical literacy skills, and also whereby like some of the best footballers, as we know, also are physically gifted, and they were just so impressive. And obviously, technically, they were really good also, so they could trap the ball, secure it, pass with one touch, everything like that. But it's like they wouldn't have had an opportunity to show that to the maximum without that kind of physical um, capabilities as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, you go back to someone like Messi. Like Messi as a kid, you see videos of him when he was playing 2 years above. He was an absolute
Yeah.
dot, but he still had the ability to run past five players, and his
Mm,
speed, his agility, and his low center of mass. There's got to
yeah.
be something physically, I think, for some players coming into the pathway that can actually like affect the game longer term.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just think if they're miles off it physically, irrespective of maturation, like if the
Mm,
gap's that big, the gap probably won't ever get closed.
yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
Take the maturation into account where there's players who may be on the border, and they've got parents who are tall for goalkeepers, for example, and you feel like the growth spurts come in. That's when you take it into account to be able to, yeah, go on their side.
Yeah, and just touching on that, like I suppose as coaches, then we need to be aware of the players' current performance, but also analyzing their kind of long-term potential as well. So, we're looking at two aspects all the time, aren't we? Like what's
Yeah,
in front of us, but also, and that is a bit of the art, whereby, okay, you're getting the scientific objective data about physicality and everything like that, but also you're using your coach's eye of like, okay, what type of player can this person develop into in the medium and the long term future?
yeah, 100%. That is the art that I think is probably the most difficult to judge. What I would say is, I don't think you can progress somebody on an arbitrary scale from 0 to 10.
Mm,
There has to be something where they can outperform somebody in the game that's going to link to them being good in that area of the pitch or longer term. If they don't have any of that from a physical perspective and they're technically okay, I think the gap's too big. Like I don't think no coach in the world can turn that person into an elite player. But then the other thing is not everyone's going to be a professional footballer, and sometimes you need people for the vehicle, and that's what some people have to understand. You need 8 to 10 players in each age group to facilitate the 1 to 2 players that might get across the line. And that's really hard because coaches always want the next player, want to work with 10 really good players, but you need a balance of players in a team that are going to be able to get other players on the ball or are going to be able to, hide their discrepancies at times to be able to let them flourish. That's another one.
Yeah, and like to ensure that everybody has a good, enjoyable experience and journey as good as possible. It's not going to all lead to professional careers and everything like that. Okay, I know we've touched on it really, but on the growth and maturation stuff, but it's worth kind of mentioning a little bit more and the like how significant things can be as regards to biological maturation, the relative age effects. So players that are born in like Q1, quarter one of the age group or the calendar year, whichever it is, and also kind of early versus late developers within talent ID. So, okay. And I know, like, and I think it's worth mentioning about biobanding as well, which has become a real kind of buzz term at the moment in youth development.
Yeah, so let me depict a few of those things. So, relative age effects is something that can be done across obviously all pathways without any resource really. Just,
Yeah,
is somebody in quarter one, two, three, or four?
yeah,
Um, So that would indicate that somebody in quarter four, obviously, the higher up you go, the gap closes a little bit. But somebody in quarter four, definitely at like 11s and 12s, have arguably had nearly a year's less coaching experience, playing experience than the other players. So irrespective of physical ability, because they could be an early maturer, but
yeah,
Q4, they've had less time to develop than somebody who's born in Q1. So that's just something to think about in terms of training history and training age. In terms of then the maturation status, like we're very fortunate that we conduct these tests. You can do them pretty simply. You get pretty accurate adult parents' heights, and you get heights and weights, sitting height, standing height, and weight, and that can calculate in terms of where that player is in their development journey. So, are they going through peak height velocity? Where are they in relation to where they should be chronologically? And you can start to see whether they're behind the curve from a growth perspective or ahead or in the middle. And then that information goes into the pot when you're talking about a player. Like if you've got a player who's physically quite dominant, and you've all seen these players in the youth development phase who are bigger, stronger, and will dominate games, but they're an early maturer and they've got the biological maturation of, let's say, a 16-year-old at 14 and a half, then
yeah,
at some point they're not going to be that dominant. So are their skill sets around it being developed enough so that when everybody catches up from a growth perspective, they're still going to be effective? That's a question for coaches. And then on the flip side, we spoke about it briefly. If somebody's significantly undermaturated and physically is struggling in certain moments, is there enough there from a physical perspective and a performance perspective that's going to still enable that player get success and develops well, but also like, are we waiting for every physical capacity to basically increase by threefold for them to be able to compete? Because if we are, I would say that's where the gap's too big. But if they
yeah,
are able to compete in moments, they're relatively quite strong. They can change direction well. They can still beat somebody 1v1, but they haven't got the top speed to really dominate in longer periods. I would say that's okay. Like we can develop that over time as they get stronger and more powerful. But if they
yeah.
don't have any of them moments, I think that's where you're probably saying that they're physically not going to get to the promised land.
Yeah, it's really interesting there, isn't it? Because you can have a player who is small, a late developer, born in quarter four, late, biologically really immature, but then they'll never develop
Yeah,
physically in the future. They might just be small, they might just be light, and such is the way it is. So I suppose you always have to think again, you have your objective data somewhat, but also you need to project into the future and see where this player is likely to be. Yep.
yeah. No, we also have predicted adult height, so we do
Yeah.
have the ability within 2 or 3 inches. It's not 100% accurate, but
It's
we
quite
could
good.
see, yeah.
Yeah.
If you see that this long term, this player is only going to be 5'5", and they're
Yeah.
quite small now,
Yeah.
and for me, when players are small, they should still be able to be like effective in duels. They should still be able to use their
Yeah,
body
yeah,
well. They should
yeah,
manipulate the ball within a really small area. They should arguably be better at manipulating the ball in an area than somebody who's gone for a growth spurt and their
yeah,
limbs are a little bit gangly. If they can't compete in any physical aspect of the game, then I think like, yeah, and they're only going to get to 5-5, then arguably they're going to have to be unbelievable from a technical perspective where they can dominate the game in that way
yeah.
for them to succeed.
Yeah, and like I think it's very important to note again, because I think we already have touched on it, that like we're not saying that you have to be physically dominant, you have to be big, you have to get around the pitch and everything like that. Like technical skills and tactical nous can make up somewhat for those things. Like some of the best footballers ever have been 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", Messi, Maradona, etc. But you have to be really, really great technically, to make up for that. And also, as we say, like that really high level of physical literacy, that your body awareness, your power, your explosiveness, your speed, etc. It's not all about size or everything like that.
Yeah.
Um, can you just touch on then what biobanding is and how you've used it in the present and in the past?
Yeah, so but biobanding is essentially like grouping players in their biological maturation age as opposed to the chronological age. So, based on the equations I said and the stuff that we can collate, we can put players who are at the same maturity status offset against each other. So, essentially, it removes anything around chronological age and it just says from a physical perspective, we're going to match you up to somebody else who's in the same like phase of the development journey.
Yeah,
Now, this has phased out a little bit in academy football. It went for a stage where it was quite common. We had fixtures against other clubs. There was like 4 or 5 clubs who would do it pretty
yeah,
well. Like, and we was one of them. However, I think all of the other factors that we spoke about, so relative age effect within the same age group in terms of years of experience and having more time to develop, also must be thought about, not just physical and biological maturity. Also, if somebody's an under 16 playing with an under 14 because they've got the same maturity status, the under 16 arguably will find it way easier because they've had 2 years
mm,
extra of developing and they're also training and competing with older players and they probably found solutions to deal with that quite well. So
yeah.
I think actually teaching players in and around their own age group along different maturity scales how to really compete and be effective against different sizes and shapes and different physical opponents is probably more beneficial than putting them up match to match with somebody that's similar in maturity status. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And my purely my own personal thoughts around that was I always thought there was, or in the industry, the way there's different fads and different kind of cool things that there's loads of research and all. I think there has been an awful lot on biological maturity and everything like that. But for me, the most important aspect of all of that is understanding from the coach, patience, like being a good coach that you can adapt the sessions or you can give solutions or help facilitate solutions for those players. And those players are smart players also themselves, intelligent, that if they can find solutions, like it's okay that they're biologically immature, physically not developed, etc. But if they can adapt and find their own solutions on the pitch, you've definitely got a player on your hands. If they can't, maybe you don't have a player.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the level that they should be operating at.
I, I've said this before on a podcast, but it's quite prevalent in my mind at the minute. But like I coach my son's team, who are obviously under sevens or under eights,
Yeah,
7 and 8 year olds. My son is somebody who is Q4, so at this age he is missing out on probably like a seventh more development time than somebody who's older.
yeah,
Um, he's physically like not able to run past people, really good in contacts and duels, but knows that. So when he gets on the ball and he drops into little pockets and he knows his first touch has got to be better, and then he just lends it to somebody who's a bit of a runner at five-a-side who can then go on and dominate 1v1. So you're right, it's about the coach identifying strengths, weaknesses across that four corners and being like, is the two or three other areas really, really strong that actually, it means that player plays slightly different to somebody else playing that position.
mm,
So it's really interesting. And I think it's the coach's job to be able to like coach the detail in those players to say, well, actually, like if we put the ball down the side, you're not really going to be effective. But if you just drop into this space, get on the half turn and then slide someone, you're going to be $1 million. Like that's the
Yeah.
simple differences of somebody looking good and somebody not looking good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, I think it's an interesting topic, definitely. Just briefly then about like coaches and their own biases. So, like, how aware do coaches need to be of their own biases when identifying talent? And that could be like a particular physical profile, a personality type, or even players that like remind them of themselves. Like, I think studies have been shown across other industries about that a person will choose a person of similar heritage as themselves, even for, for promotion and stuff like that. So these
Yeah.
are inherent biases that everybody has.
Yeah, I mean, there's been extensive research, not just in sport, but also business, about how much affirmation bias there is in hiring people and
Mm,
getting connection with people. If somebody comes on and talks just like you or has had a similar journey to you, you automatically get a bit of affiliation with that person. And so
yeah,
I think it's really important. I think that's always going to be there. We're always
yeah,
going to be connected to certain players more than others based on rapport, based on experiences, etc. But I think the more diversity you have on people judging these players and also making decisions on these players, then the more you're going to remove that bias from just a singular decision.
yeah,
Which is why I love the way we do the MDT panels, where everybody brings their views to the table, and you can see if somebody's like all in for this player, like they've got a massive, whether they just think they're a really good player or they've got some unconscious bias or affirmation bias
yeah,
behind. It's then other people's jobs to say, hold on a minute, have you looked at this? Well, I don't actually think he's that good at this when I saw him. So give me some examples there and challenge, check and challenge that
yeah.
review. So that's probably the best way you can probably eradicate that. Not let one person decide whether that player is going to get in or not.
Yeah, and like I know within a team as well, and we remember like Lee Hayes and Laban and different coaches that we've worked with. I mean, you had Lee Hayes on the podcast previously within the academy, and they were like East London born and brought up, and they would naturally gravitate towards that type of player or the player who came from that background. And yeah, and I might um I might latch on to a slightly different player. I know in the Gaelic football I often liked a player who was similar to myself as a player, and you had to constantly check that and go, okay, actually I need to be careful here because I don't want 15 guys who, would motor around the pitch and work off left and right foot and stuff, but not physically dominant. So I had to all the time make sure I was speaking to the rest of the backroom staff, who might have been taller, stronger, and used to play the game slightly differently than me. So I would always be checking in with those coaches and selectors about who they like, who they don't like, who they want to push on, and everything like that.
Yeah, and I think you're when you see a player like yourself, you're comfortable in how to coach that player. So you
Mhm.
feel because you've gone through similar experience, you've played similar way, that you can see the game similar. So
Yeah,
take yourself out your comfort zone and get into the detail of coaching players who are the complete opposite to you, but then
yeah.
you might be able to give something that you've got to them that can maybe round them off a little bit more.
Yeah, that's why I signed up to the national goalkeeping coaching course, and then it got cancelled 2 days before.
Fair enough.
Just,
Defend the goal. Defend the
yeah,
goal.
defend the space, defend the goal, defend the area.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so then just from your moving on to the next section. So from your experience then, what kind of qualities do players who successfully progress through the pathway usually have?
Um, good question, and I think it's very varied depending on the player. But
Mm,
I think one thing that they all have is a tenacity and an openness and a humbleness to just get better and better. Like,
mm,
there's very few players that have come through the system that have gone on and done really well that are actually really difficult to coach. There are some, and there are examples in the game, but they're
yeah,
very few and far between. Like the maverick type player who you just can't connect with, is not interested. At some point, will find a level and it will stop them progressing to a certain level. There's players playing in the game now that I've worked with historically that could be a Champions League player, but
mhm,
ultimately their attitude means they're knocking around the League One and Championship essentially. So they will find their level. I think the thing that we spoke about before is that somebody's always got an outstanding quality. So whether that be their technical ability to do something on the ball that is better than most in that age group, whether it be a physical ability, whether it be their understanding and organizing or their leadership, there's something that always becomes their super strength. And that's something that I think you need to look out for coaches, because we always go to the areas that they need to work on, but can we develop a quality that's already good, that's going to be elite? Because that's probably something that's going to get them either in the team or signed somewhere else.
Yeah, it's often said by coaches, isn't it, about a player of like, oh, he's a one trick pony, but what a trick. So if you've got a wide attacker and they're so good in 1v1 situations and they always do a step over right, step over left, and then knock the ball past the defender, like
Yeah.
if it works, yeah, keep doing it. There's no reason to limit that.
Yeah, and even like I just think a few examples over the year. The academy football wants you to play nice football and feed it into midfield, but we've had a couple of players who actually can just diag the ball 50 yards out to the opposite winger.
Mm.
You know that's going to get in somebody's team further down the line. That's a skill where you can just reverse the diag 50 yards and just become on the front foot and switch to play quickly. But that's something that can, and if you're in a system that doesn't promote that, how do you still make that their strength without compromising your style of play? And these are the things that you have to think about as coaches as you're developing.
What about that weakness? So if a player has that weakness, like, are you better off just focusing on the super strength, or do you need to kind of keep an eye on that, aspect of their game that they're weak on?
Yeah, I think you can never only solely focus on one aspect of someone's game. So whether it's a 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, there'll be a number of things that you feel are important for that player to do their job role well. Now, if something is significantly low, the chances are, if it's an essential job requirement, chances are it's probably going to limit them at some point. So you have to get it better. If it's something that's not essential, and the thing that comes to my mind is wide players being able to hit the ball. So if a winger can't head the ball and maybe gets a little bit scared or is not very good at contact, or the timing of the header's not good, we've all been through players who actually just don't like heading it. They might limit their ability to score at the back post with headers. They might do. So that might reduce 2 to 3 goals a year. But is it going to stop them becoming a professional footballer? Probably not, because most of the time they're going to be going at players or stopping players when the ball's on the ground. So you have to make a judgment as to how much time you spend on it within your limited time, to whether it's going to stop them at some point or not.
Yeah, I've got a whole squad who don't like heading the ball.
Well, do you know what, mate? Do you know what? Even at women's, like, I know it's tier 4, but like
Yeah,
it's football. Just there's not many people that love heading the ball.
yeah.
There's not, and that's a big statement here. Sorry if I'm, but
No,
like
no,
from
no.
from what I've seen, it's just there's only a handful of people that actually really want to go and attack the ball.
Yeah,
And I think the higher up, obviously, that changes, but it's definitely something to
yeah.
think about.
You want to make sure your centre backs at least love heading.
Well, yeah, centre backs and maybe I think if you've got 3 in a team at tier 4 at
Mm.
the top, you're gonna score set pieces. You are.
Yeah, you're doing okay. I know we've kind of briefly touched on it then, but like, is there a place then for that, or what are some of the challenges then for that kind of maverick player or project player? And I know the interesting thing is like, sometimes you hear about somebody, a coach or a player developer, they've been in the game quite a while and they have a lot of experience, and it's like they can touch on different experiences, so different issues crop up throughout the season, and it's like they can dip back into previous experience of like, oh, I had a player like that once, or I've had come across that situation and everything. And that to me is like where that's good experience and a quantity of good experiences that you can dip into.
Yeah. So just a bit of a story now. So when I was at Chelsea working in foundation phase, we had Michael Elise, who was
Mm.
under 10.
Oh, geez.
Um, and we hired a coach to man mark him, weren't we, during training, to just get him to do the activities, because it was set up like a carousel. There was technical, there was
Oh,
physical,
yeah.
there was
Mm.
2v2, there was all the stuff going on this training night. And we
Michael's
used to
being the special stuff.
Yeah, but it was a really nice setup for that age group. There's real variety of stuff, and basically all the foundation phase age groups come together and they rotate around. And he just couldn't stay on task. He just wouldn't. Like he would. He was an unbelievable player from young, like just
Yeah.
complete maverick. So
Mm.
it got to under 11s, under 12s. Chelsea actually decided that they couldn't handle him. Like they just couldn't facilitate his maverickness, and they didn't feel they had the resource to keep him on track. And
Yeah.
they probably didn't know what he would turn out as a player.
Yeah. Yeah.
Subsequently, he goes on to be arguably one of the best players in the world and
Mm.
playing at the top level. So I think if I think the more you've seen and the more caliber of players you've seen come through the building, you know if somebody's a real special talent. You just
Mm.
know. But what you have to sometimes, I think about, have you got the resource and the quality of staff in the building to actually contain and develop this player? Or
Yeah.
is it going to do so much damage to the rest of the group, the culture of the group, that actually you end up missing out on 3 or 4 other players because you're spending so much time on them? And that's something that you have to decide as a coach in the organisation, whether you feel this player is worth it and whether you've
Yeah.
got the capacity to deal with it.
Yeah. And I mean, the likes of him, it's difficult to know, isn't it? Because you would expect that he would have always made it to the very, very top regardless. And maybe he needed to hop around to, like, I don't know, could I envisage he staying in one environment from the age of like 9 all the way up to, early 20s or whatever he is now? I
Yeah,
don't know. Is that possible? And also, I suppose there can be project players that are not outstanding. There might be some bias from the coach of like they like a player, like
yeah,
socially, psychologically, personality wise, but also they like how they play. But as we mentioned before, they might be biologically immature. But there is the question of will they ever actually reach that stage? And that's where maybe a project, remains kind of unfulfilled. Just final question then, just to wrap up, Ross. Once the players enter into the academy system, then just what are the next kind of brief next steps? And I don't think it's worth going into too much detail because again, I've earmarked our next pod as being kind of like what,
the development journey.
yeah, exactly, development journey once they're in the building. But what are just the first few kind of steps around like they're getting, receiving IDPs and stuff like that?
Yeah, obviously then they become like a member of the full program. So yeah, from an IDP perspective, they would have started to be profiled throughout their trial because, part of the feedback would cover those 4 corners, but they would then go into a formal IDP. Like this is where we feel you need to work on across the 4 or 5 areas. Um, they would obviously, I think it's really important that they sometimes trialists that come in the building, they've been like foot to floor, like trying to impress for 4 weeks.
Mm,
Often when they come in the building, like you see a dip in performance
yeah,
because they've been trying to impress so much. It's like that like post relief that you get in the
mm,
building that actually your body just naturally and you're still
yeah,
not used to the environment, but you kind of been running at
a little bit
100
lull.
yeah, you often
Yeah.
see that. So
Mm,
sometimes you see coaches going, have we made a mistake here? But like you just have to be patient, like be
yeah.
patient, provide them with the support and basically embed them into the program where like they're still new to the environment. Like they've been an outsider for 4 or 5 weeks. Now they've got to get used to like being part of the squad and team. So
Yeah.
IDPs like psychosocial wraparound support is really important.
Yeah.
And getting to know them a bit more, like getting to know
Yeah.
them and the family a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
I think can help you coach.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think along with a lot of these things that we've touched upon, it's like that understanding from the coach, isn't it? Of being patient and knowing that these young players will be inconsistent from day to day, from week to week, even from season to season. So that's knowledge around that area and being patient then with the young players.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Ross, great. Thank you very much. We'll leave for there and we'll see you on our next episode.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
The Locker Room podcast is brought to you by the people from DSS Coaching. I'm Ciaran Deely. We run an online CPD service for Gaelic Games coaches. If you want to sign up to our services where we provide weekly and daily coaching resources for our 700 strong group of coaches, community of coaches, head over onto our website www.dsscoaching.ie